foreign and security policy think tank here in Sydney, and I'm really delighted to be invited to chair this session with two very distinguished international visitors. From what I've seen of the conference over the past few days, we've covered a lot of ground, much of it I think moving rightly to an operational level. And this is obviously very important for the Australian Navy, the Sea Power Centre and our hosts. But I'm glad to see the conversation today also moving to, I guess, a larger strategic diplomatic level, because there is such a changing context for all of these operational challenges that we've discussed. We need to have a clearer understanding of that, and there's, in my view, been quite a lot of rather simplistic analysis doing the rounds in recent years, particularly on issues like why the Indian Ocean matters, really the subject of our session today. Now, here in Australia, we're told that we've neglected the Indian Ocean for too long. We have a two-ocean geography, and we've too often focused on the Pacific and perhaps seen the Indian Ocean as a place to cross to get to the Gulf. But of course, Australia's maritime and Australia's naval history in the Indian Ocean is actually very rich. It goes back a long way, and it's very significant. And in a way, we're perhaps returning to that now. Now, with all the dramatic talk of strategic rivalry in the Indian Ocean, of course, the famous Kaplan essay and much else, we run the risk of forgetting that the Indian Ocean is not only India's ocean. I know we've got some very senior Indian naval representation here today to remind us of India's very central role in the Indian Ocean, but there are other powers, other countries in the region whose perspectives and capabilities we need to take into account, and indeed whose diplomatic and maritime partnership we will need to deal with the transnational threats that still dominate the Indian Ocean's challenges. Now, the two presentations here today, I think, are going to be a perfect reflection of that, and a useful corrective for the narrow view that it's now all about great power rivalry in the Indian Ocean. Dr. Christian Bouchard, who's a very eminent geographer from Canada, you can read his biography in the information pack, will, I think, remind us that France remains a serious and significant power in the Indian Ocean in its own right, and indeed, unlike many of the external stakeholders, a territorial state in the Indian Ocean. We will also hear from an African perspective, which I think is something we too rarely hear in this country, and Captain Frank van Rooyen, who, although he's a former South African naval officer, has come all the way from Argentina to be with us today, will offer us an African perspective, not only a South African perspective, but really looking at the interests and challenges for countries along the east coast of Africa in dealing with these problems. Now, I'll go no further in stealing the thunder of our distinguished speakers today. They have about 30 minutes to speak each. We'll finish this session promptly at 12:30, and we'll certainly allow time for Q&A and some, what I hope is going to be rich discussion. So with that, I'll ask our first speaker, Dr. Christian Bouchard, to take the floor.
Thank you. Dear hosts from the Royal Australian Navy and the Sea Power Centre, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank the Sea Power Conference team for putting together this 3 days of very stimulating talks and for their wonderful hospitality. My presentation today is entitled The Marine Nationale in the Southwest and Southern Indian Ocean. The aim of the paper is to provide an overview of the importance of the French Navy presence and activities in these two parts of the Indian Ocean, where France is both a main maritime stakeholder and the traditional leading naval player. In the context of the Indian Ocean, France can be considered as both a regional state, at least on behalf of its island territories, and an external great power significantly involved in the region. In terms of its military presence in the Indian Ocean, France is unique with its 3 regional commands, which are à l'Indien, that includes the French Maritime Force in the Indian Ocean Maritime Zone and the French force in the United Arab Emirates. COMFOR Djibouti for the French force in Djibouti, and CONSUB Fazoil for the French Army force in the Southern Indian Ocean Zone. Those forces are mainly based in Rooyen Island, but also in Mayotte. In addition to those are the French contributions to European and international naval coalition actually operating in the northwest quadrant of the Indian Ocean. This French military involvement and setup in the Indian Ocean is there to remain at least until 2025, as the 2008 Defense White Paper recommends a concentration of the French military forces on a strategic axis that extends from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, where it clearly focuses on the Western Indian Ocean and where it reaches southward the French Indian Ocean territories. In the southwest quadrant of the Indian Ocean, France claims and exercises sovereignty over Rooyen and Mayotte, which are the only inhabited islands, over Crozet Islands, Kerguelen Islands, St. Paul and Amsterdam Islands in the southern Indian Ocean, as well as over 5 very small islands located around Madagascar and known as the Scattered Islands, or in French, Îles Éparses. Altogether, these island territories are seen as being France of the Indian Ocean. With a population of about 1 million inhabitants and a land area of some 10.5 thousand square kilometers, this French of the Indian Ocean may be seen as modest in terms of population and land, as well as in terms of economy. However, it is in the maritime domain that French sovereign presence in the Indian Ocean takes all its dimension, with an EEZ of some 2.7 million square kilometers and an even more extended continental shelf. Thus, the ratio of area is at least 265 to 1 between the terrestrial territory and the maritime zone, which highlights the importance of this maritime dimension of France of the Indian Ocean. Consequently, maritime affairs are of prime significance for France in this region of the world, where its naval forces are asked to fulfill a great range of missions. In terms of maritime issues and context, 2 very different situations are found in the French Southern Indian Ocean Maritime Zone that essentially divide this area in 2 around latitude 30 degrees south, what we consider as the Southwest Indian Ocean and the Southern Indian Ocean. The very importance of this maritime dimension of France of the Indian Ocean has just been recognized and formalized in the French policy paper for maritime affairs in the south of the Indian Ocean, which has just been released in December 2011. The 2 main ideas that have to be recalled from this document are, first, the time has come for the different parts of this France of the Indian Ocean to think collectively and to collaborate on regional issues. And second, the sea, and thus the maritime domain, is the cement of the France of the Indian Ocean. As well, it is at the heart of the regional cooperation for both France and the French Indian Ocean territories. France and the French Navy have a long and rich history in the Indian Ocean in general, and in the Southwest Indian Ocean in particular. Following the dissolution of the French East India Company in 1769, the French Southwest Indian Ocean colonies and the French Indian Comptoir were placed under the direct administration of the State Secretariat of the Navy. From there on, what became the Marine Nationale after the French Revolution operated in the Indian Ocean and eventually developed a major navy yard in Diego-sur-Arès, located at the northern tip of Madagascar. In 1973, in the wake of the Socialist Revolution in Madagascar, the French withdrawal from Diego-sur-Arès led to the creation of the naval unit of La Rooyen. Today, the French maritime forces operating in this area do so under the joint command of COMSUB Fazoil, the commanding general for the French Army forces in the southern Indian Ocean zone. The commanding general is seconded by a Navy officer, the commander of the southern Indian Ocean Maritime Zone, who serve as his naval advisor. The commander of the Maritime Zone is also in charge of the naval base of Port-de-Galais, serve as the assistant to the prefect of Rooyen in regard to state matters at sea, is the French delegate national coordinator for the worldwide navigational warning system. Also directed by the commander of the Maritime Zone and significantly relying on the Marine National assets, CROSS Rooyen is a specialized service of the Administration of Maritime Affairs. Its competence extends to search and rescue at sea, monitoring of fishing activities, monitoring of sea traffic, broadcasting of maritime safety information, monitoring of pollution, as well as maritime assistance services and maritime safety. The Fazoy naval component now comprises the naval base of Port-de-Galais in Rooyen Island and its annex of Mayotte naval base element with their respective resources. The naval base is home of the main vessel affected to the region, while the Mayotte station is home of a variety of small vessels. The northern half of the South Indian Ocean Maritime Zone corresponds to what we regard as the Southwest Indian Ocean. This part of the Indian Ocean has a quite vibrant maritime life, being at the crossroad of important maritime routes linking Asia to South Africa and to the Atlantic Ocean. Also being a global hotspot for marine biodiversity, a relatively good and intensively harvested fishing area, especially for tuna species, an area of significant migration and human trafficking, as well as an enjoyable tropical area for yachting, sailing, and water-based recreation. However, it is also characterized by the general low level of development of much of its coastal communities, especially on the African continent and Madagascar coasts, and with the noticeable and important exception of France, by the low regional state capabilities in terms of maritime affairs and state action at sea. In regard to maritime threats and security issues, the region has enjoyed a relatively calm and peaceful situation in the 1980s and 1990s. The main issue then was that of illegal fishing in the poorly surveyed local exclusive economic zones. However, things began to change in the last decade with growing concerns about port security issues, onshore terrorism group activities, yachting insecurities, illegal trafficking, and illegal migration. But in the last years, the number one threat has become piracy that rapidly migrated eastward and southward from the water of Somalia to deep into the seas, as well as to Kenyan, Tanzanian, and Seychelles waters. It is in this general context that the Marine Nationale actually operates in the Southwest Indian Ocean. Its contribution to fighting both piracy and illegal fishing in the region is very significant. For example, the vessels of the Marine Nationale have completed 34 of the 44 French fisheries monitoring patrol operations over the 3-year period of 2008-2010 for a total of 745 days at sea. As a result, Marine Nationale vessels have continued to intercept, inspect, and reroute illegally fishing boats in the recent years, like in October 2009 with the Indonesian vessel Linsar 8 caught in Rooyen Island EEZ, and in April 2011 with the Sri Lankan dhow Sundharma caught in the Glorioso Islands EEZ. Regarding maritime piracy, this threat now extends more south in the Comoros, Mayotte, and North Madagascar vicinities, as well as into the Mozambique Channel. This southward trend was evidenced by the two first Somali pirates attempt attacks recorded in late December 2010 in the Mozambican waters. Just a few days later, and even more south, Somali pirates successfully hijacked the Mozambican fishing vessel Vega 5, which later served as a pirate mothership until it was recaptured in the Arabian Sea by the Indian Navy in March 2011. The trend for southward attack has been confirmed in 2011, with some attempted attacks recorded in September and October in the vicinity of Comoros, another attempt attack on a container vessel around Mayotte Island, as well as one suspicious incident reported by a bulk carrier around 60 nautical miles east of Mauritius in March 2011. In terms of fighting piracy in the Western Indian Ocean, the overall contribution of the Marine Nationale is of prime significance, with a permanent vessel contributing to the European Union Naval Force Operation Atalanta, as well as with a number of regional cooperation activities. Comsub is deeply involved in this task, while part of the operation falls under its area of responsibility, and as the two frigates based in Rooyen have participated several times in Operation Atalanta since its debut in 2008. However, countering piracy has also become a regular task for Fazal maritime forces while operating on their own and in their regular multitask operation conducted in this part of the Indian Ocean. For this particular duty, the two frigates, Floreal and Nivose, have proven very effective with their onboard Panther helicopter. In addition to sovereignty affirmation, fishery controls, maritime security, including countering piracy, and search and rescue, other missions affected to Marine Nationale vessels in the area are anti-pollution duties, maritime intelligence gathering, military diplomacy, regional cooperation exercise and training, countering illegal immigration, humanitarian relief, as well as other public service missions such as medical emergency, special transportation, and supply to the scattered islands. Altogether, this highlights the great significance of Marine Nationale contribution, first to the regional maritime affairs, second to the French state action at sea, and thirdly, to the local French island communities of Rooyen and Mayotte, as well as to the scattered islands. This is certainly to continue for a long time, as the regional maritime environment is becoming less secure while becoming more densely occupied. It is also an area that has the potential to become a very real maritime security hotspot in a not too distant future, with the growing insecurities of maritime piracy and onshore poverty, but also in the wake of the offshore oil and gas exploration activities that are now accelerating in the Mozambique Channel, and the potential for large-scale exploitation in the next few decades. In addition to these activities of the Marine Nationale in the region, which are performed by the Maritime Force based at the naval base in Rooyen, are the specific activities of the Naval Detachment of Mayotte, which is greatly involved in two main local missions, namely the search and rescue operation and fighting illegal immigration. In terms of search and rescue, the French sovereign maritime waters of Mayotte fall under the responsibility of the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center of Madagascar. However, due to weak Malagasy SAR capacities in this area, as well as its great distance from Rooyen, Mayotte does have its own maritime search and rescue center that is known as Organisation SECMAR, and this organization acts in substitution to the RCC Madagascar in these French sovereign maritime waters. The annual number of SAR operations conducted by Organisation SECMAR has recently grown dramatically from an average of 30 from the period of 2000 to 2006 to 70 in 2007 and reached 84 in 2010. The Marine Nationale contribution to Organisation SECMAR is mainly realized through the headquarters for state action at sea that assume a permanent radar, radio, and telephone watch, but also assist in some organizational and operation coordination, as well as in participating in operations at sea. But the major security issue in Mayotte is that of illegal immigration, essentially using small fishing boat called kwasa-kwasa and departing from the Comorian island of Anjouan. In 2008, French Senator Henri Thor estimated that just a little less than 1/3 of the population living on the island is made of illegal migrants, which would represent 50,000 to 55,000 people. He also estimated that the annual influx of migrants can be around 16,000 people. To cope with this situation, French government has in the last decade significantly strengthened its control activity both at sea and on land. As a result, the annual expulsion from the territory increased from 4,000 in early 2000 to something around 16,000 in 2007, and even reached 26,000 in 2010. As many of the illegal migrants are apprehended at sea, this represents a very intense policing activity in the French sovereign waters of Mayotte. The Marine Nationale contribution to fighting illegal immigration in Mayotte ranged from surveillance, patrol, and SAR operation in distant water, to participation in monitoring, inspection, and search and rescue operation in the sovereign waters of Mayotte. Considering that Mayotte is a pocket of relative prosperity in an archipelago of very low development, the problem of illegal immigration is very likely, therefore, to remain a major issue for some time. Unlike the northern half of the southern Indian Ocean maritime zone, the southern half is not populated and is characterized by rough sea condition, by subantarctic weather condition in its lowest latitudes, as well as it is much more isolated. The main activity of Cross Rooyen and Marine Nationale in the South Indian Ocean focus on monitoring the fishing activities in the EEZ. This area has been under great pressure from fishing pirates illegally operating in the region, especially from the mid-1990s to the early 2000s, and mainly harvesting the Patagonian toothfish. In terms of patrolling the area and fisheries monitoring, France has reacted promptly to the fast-growing illegal, irregulated, and unreported fishing in this part of its EEZ. Overall, a total of 20 inspection and fishing boat rerouting to Rooyen Island took place during the 4-year period of 1997 to 2000. The last event of this kind occurred in June 2004, when the longliner Apache, operating under Hondurian flag, was caught fishing illegally in the Kerguelen's EEZ. Facing a common threat at the end of the 1990s and early 2000s, France and Australia have initiated a very successful cooperation on EUU fishing in the southern Indian Ocean. This led to the treaty between the two states on cooperation in the maritime area adjacent to their southern Indian Ocean territories, signed in Canberra in November 2003. The treaty establishes a formal framework for cooperation for cooperative surveillance activity and research activity between the two states in their respective territorial seas and EEZs in the southern Indian Ocean. A new agreement on cooperative enforcement of fishery laws between the same two states and for the same maritime territories was signed in Paris in June 2007 and entered into force in January 2011. The cooperative patrols in the French and Australian southern waters has become a reality with the quasi-permanent presence of dedicated vessels in the area. Altogether, these vessels conducted 30 patrols operations in the 3-year period of 2008-2010, including 11 made by Marine Nationale vessels for a total of 358 days at sea. While in the area, these vessels can also be called to participate in SAR operation. They can also be requested for medical assistance and evacuation from the personnel of the Southern Scientific Bases and for the personnel of the longliners fishing in the area. In regard to satellite surveillance, the remote sensing technology has proven very efficient and cost-effective to monitor these very large and distant maritime areas. Operated by Navy personnel at Cross Rooyen, the actual system uses data from RadarSat-2 and ENVISAT and monitors the French and Australian EEZ as well as the surrounding high seas. Thus, in the southern Indian Ocean, Marine Nationale vessels respond to three main missions, which are fisheries monitoring and fishing laws enforcement, in addition to the OSIRIS and the ACV Ocean Protector patrols. Secondly, represent and affirm the French sovereignty over its three subantarctic islands territories. And thirdly, when the necessity arises, participate to other public missions such as search and rescue, medical repatriation, and special material and cargo transportation to the scientific basis. All of these are of prime significance and make the Marine Nationale one of the main actors in this remote region. Marine Nationale is also at the heart of the cooperation between France and Australia in this area of the world, an example of a very successful, multifaceted collaboration between two states and their different services, a model to be followed for cooperation between France and South Africa for Prince Edward Islands. Another aspect of Marine Nationale presence in this area of the world is certainly its very diverse and significant contribution to local communities, and especially to the local community of Rooyen Island, where most of its assets and personnel are based. This local contribution is not addressed in my paper. Nevertheless, apart from its professional activities at sea, the presence of Marine Nationale has significant economic positive outcomes, and Marine Nationale enjoys a positive and diverse relation with the general public, as well as is getting very good local press, at least in Rooyen Island. In conclusion, France Marine Nationale has a permanent and important presence in the southwest quadrant of the Indian Ocean that ensues directly from its territorial position in the region. Considering the very importance of the maritime dimension of France of the Indian Ocean, maritime affairs are of prime significance for France in this region of the world, where its naval force are asked to fulfill a great range of missions. In this context, Marine Nationale contributes to the defense of the general national interests of France in the region, as well as it contributes locally to the island territories' well-being and prosperity. At the same time, France and Friends of the Indian Ocean pursue together a strategy of strong commitment to and active involvement in regional cooperation, in which maritime issues are central and Marine Nationale an important partner. Thus, the permanent present and intensive activity of Marine Nationale is a main feature of the southwest and southern Indian Ocean. In the last decade, the outcome of its great involvement in safeguarding the good order at sea has been very positive, but the region is still facing various and serious security challenges at sea. Considering the fact that most of the littoral communities have relatively low socioeconomic development and the resulting insecurities that are quite high ashore, as well as the fact that large offshore oil and gas projects may very well be developed in the Southwest Indian Ocean in the coming decades, we can therefore predict that maritime security issue will continue for a long time to be of great concern in this part of the world. Consequently, and taking into account French sovereign interests in the region, Marine Nationale will remain a significant and pertinent actor of the regional maritime affair for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bouchard, and perfect timing, I may add. A very comprehensive and useful presentation. And it really does reinforce those points that I think France remains a very significant player in the Indian Ocean with capabilities and responsibilities, a very large area of, very large zone for surveillance in particular, and that the challenges in that part of the world remain overwhelmingly transnational in nature. I'll now invite Captain Van Rooyen, who's had a very distinguished naval career with South African Navy and also an expert role with the South African Institute for International Affairs. Captain Van Rooyen.
Most of you will have seen the movie The King's Speech. For those of you who have not had the opportunity, here is a two-line synopsis. It is the story of King George VI of Britain, his impromptu ascension to the throne, and the Australian speech therapist who helped the monarch overcome his speech defect during the critical period around World War II. One of the themes of the movie was the insistence by the Australian on informality, to the extent that their relationship became one between George and Lionel. However, this should not lead one to the presumption that I can start this presentation by saying, "Good day, mates." So, admirals, generals, air marshals, military staff, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you'll find this presentation thought-provoking at least. In some ways, another theme of the movie plays itself out in the presentation, one that features the affluent and the influential versus those on the periphery, because at one stage an irate King George refers to Lionel as being a nothing from the outback, and the importance that communication has in improving their situations. So how are we going to look at the Indian Ocean from a southern perspective? I have a threefold aim. I will be giving select perspectives from the African eastern seaboard of the Indian Ocean, with Africa's eastern seaboard being a selected representative sample of the Third World. I will infer from these perspectives whether East African navies contribute to their nation's national security and prosperity in accordance with the theme of this conference. And I also propose some policy considerations to change the situation around. So my agenda will be, because this lends itself to some appropriate international relations theory, I'll be giving some of that very briefly and to the point of a great generalization. I'll be looking at the idea of ocean and the Indian Ocean just very briefly. And then I'll try and give my view on ways that navies can and do contribute towards national security and prosperity. And then I'll give 4 East African or slant Western Indian Ocean views of the Indian Ocean. The first is an perception of increasing contestation of Africa's eastern seaboard, Africa's inability to perform maritime tasks, non-African maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean, and Africa East's involvement in international criminal law, specifically the prosecution of piracy. And then I'll use all those to draw some conclusions and make some policy recommendations. So if we look at the Indian Ocean dynamics and international relations as a subject, an academic subject theory, first of all, one has to note, of course, that sea power is a relative concept, and this relativity is underscored by issues under discussion at this conference, being essentially a developed nations event. On the one hand, if you look at the program, we talk about specialized and very complex maritime issues that involve technical cooperation, international law, economics, operational and strategic issues that contrast starkly with the contribution that the majority of Africa's maritime nations can or cannot give or are not in a position to discuss. So this lends itself to the selection of an appropriate maritime or international relations theory. So generally, and this is once again at the risk of great oversimplification, IR theories fall under two headings. First set comprise the conservative theories, being realism and liberalism, that do not envisage radical change, only incremental reform. The second comprise the critical or transformative theories, They criticize the current international system. The study of IR is regarded as important to understand world dynamics, but this should be subservient to the service of changing the world to the enhancement of its peoples. A reduction in the imbalance would be in line with calls from the South for economic justice. According to the latter's proponents, the current world system continues to be predicated upon core power structures that are politically and economically dominant, who tend to manipulate and perpetuate weak and indigent peripheral states in ways that tend to reproduce their subordinate status, maintaining their hierarchical status, even though minority experience exceptions in terms of upwards or downwards kinesis. There are also those that occupy the semi-periphery, where they interact as mediation linkages. This presentation views the Indian Ocean from the perspective of the global South, specifically Eastern African and Western Indian Ocean nations, as representative samples of the sister developing or third world or emerging nations in Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, the vast majority of United Nations members. These countries face continuously a bewildering array of insecurities. They stand in contrast to the countries of the global North or the first world nations, most of these being members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Let's just have a rapid view of the Indian Ocean. I was gratified yesterday, or on Tuesday, when this event was open, that both your Minister of Defense and your Chief of Navy made increasing references about the Indian Ocean, which it seems to be more prominent than it has been in the past. If one visualizes the Indian Ocean, it can be visualized almost like a halo, ringed by the continents of Africa, Asia, Australia, and until the recent proclamation of the Southern Ocean, Antarctica, and sprinkled with many islands and archipelagos. The writer Emrys Chu states that the Indian Ocean was the world's first cosmopolitan maritime arena, made possible by the compact and closed character of the Indian Ocean, with its narrow entrances and exits. The Indian Ocean contains, or some would say constrains, 1/3 of the world's population, enormous energy requirements, and a market for consumer goods. It has abundant resources, oil reserves, natural gas, uranium, and gold, others for extraction and exploitation. The Indian Ocean region is characterized by great diversity in terms of culture, race, religion, economic development, and strategic interests. A number of sub-regional constructs have been established. Hence, the Indian Ocean has been increasingly and continues to be a critical geostrategic space for maritime security and its concomitant insecurity for both the Indian Ocean regional and extra-regional forces and captains of merchant trade. The very idea of ocean is an intriguing one. One can almost visualize this in a three-dimensional matrix in any way that you wish, but I prefer for this presentation to use Alfred Thayer Mahan's oceanic conceptualization, that it is a wide common. The wide common has attributes that imbues it with the qualities of sea power, which means that it is a resource in itself, it is a means of transportation, information, and more importantly, or growingly importantly, that of dominion. One can also then equate ancient trade routes and modern globalization, or which is really a more rapid version, updated version of the other one. Even things like outsourcing is not a new concept. There have always been countries that make things better than other countries. Some defense implications of globalization, if we look at Professor Jeffrey Tull, he speaks in one of his latest books about a borderless world that globalization brings. Its dynamism and the fact that, and I quote, it is profoundly maritime in nature and therefore of particular interest to world's navies. Then also the whole idea that another defense implication is that there's a great paradox that as the globalization grows, there's also an infusion of various insecurities. And then the fact that non-military aspects of sea use, from maritime tourism to other attributes, contribute towards maritime power. Now, what I would like to propose is my way by which Navy contributes toward national security and prosperity, and this, obviously the theme of this particular conference. And I would like to propose that they do this, that navies do this through enabling and ensuring qualitative and continuous sea lines of communications, and that it incorporates most specifically maritime military aspects of human security, that being economic, food, health, environmental, personal, community, and political security elements of human security, as per the United Nations Human Development Report of 1994, which first properly articulated the concept of human development. Now, these are obviously very difficult to quantify, but on the other hand, the absence instigates rapid levels of insecurity at various levels. Okay, so I'm going to start now with the first of four views that Africa's East Coast and the Western Indian Seaboard may have of things that are happening in the Indian Ocean. And the first view looks at hegemonic contestation in the Indian Ocean. This contestation is noted through increased maritime activity, especially an influx of maritime forces and associated escalating bids for permanency and security of tenure. The latter refers to terms like forward positioning or establishment of naval bases, military bases in a number of countries that form the littorals or island groups along the important trade routes and energy flows that crisscross the Indian Ocean. Kearney notes, which land has been in the lead in world wealth, power, and creativity at any particular time has been determined to a significant extent by, or been correlated with, control of, or insignificant in the trade of the Indian Ocean and the lands of the periphery. And he writes the book about the history of the Indian Ocean. Most of the world's leading nations conduct operations and maintain power presences in the Indian Ocean. Most of these nations have very recently updated both their national security strategies after 9/11 and their associated defense white papers. These countries include, but are not limited to the following nations. I'll briefly run over the following 7 nations that I picked at random. Let's have a look at the United States of America. It maintains a high-profile presence from the Persian Gulf and the Horn of Africa, the island states. It has lily pads, which really support leapfrogging from one base to another, and support bases. Key interests are economic and political, underpinned by its national security goals, its commitment to international order based on rights and concomitant maritime military duties. These are all augmented by AFRICOM, which became operational in 2008. Its shared interests with like-minded countries emphasize and conflate into common goals, which tend to negate arguments that the United States is acting only in its own interests. The journal The Diplomat states, and commenting on the 2010 national strategy, it reaffirms that the United States Navy will remain the two-ocean Navy that it has been, but the second ocean is no longer the Atlantic, it's the Indian Ocean, which some may view as a prescient comment. The People's Republic of China, to consolidate and safeguard its energy and trade sea lines, and well aware of choke points, it has harnessed a string of pearl strategy, securing harbor approaches, constructing military infrastructure and strategic bases in Myanmar, the Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh, and the Maldives. A Chinese official has stated that the real threat to us is not posed by pirates, but by the countries that block our trade routes. Its potential aircraft carrier capability would, in the medium to long term, extend and enhance its operational and political reach tremendously. And if you'll pardon the pun, it will catapult it into leading maritime power status. Let's have a look at the Russian Federation. For it, the my research indicates that its importance lies in maintaining world power, a balance commensurate with its perceived position of a world power, its influence largely based on its economic resurgence. It reviews the Indian Ocean as critical to trade and the export of energy flows. It also views, and I quote, the opening of new naval bases as a noble initiative to ensure influence in strategically important parts of the globe, unquote. To this end, it has deployments and exercises that draw in Indian Ocean countries and its forces worldwide. United Kingdom, it also recently published its national security strategy called A Strong Britain in a Time of Uncertainty, which reappraises the country's role in world evolving security risks and implications in tandem with its strategic defense and security review. The latter focuses on effective and rapid reaction to threats, combining assets with countries like France. However, there can be little doubt that its footprint will be reduced, including in the Indian Ocean, as it struggles with its economy. The coalition leaders state in the document that, and I quote, as the balance of power shifts, it will become harder to project its influence abroad. On a somewhat lighter note, and regarding the strategy, The Economist notes that, say what you like about the British, we manage our decline in style. The Indian international sea lines that matrix the Indian Ocean have vital importance for it to ensure improvement of its rapidly growing economy and trade. It also aims to modernize its fleet, but it has less resources than its competitor China. It does well, particularly well, in terms of defense diplomacy. It has expanded defense contacts, exchanges, and continues to hold maritime exercises with most nations of the Western Indian Ocean and East Africa. India is particularly adept at focusing a range of available forces and resources to shape its strategic environment. An excellent example of this lies with its successful initiation and the management of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, or IONS. Japan, although its involvement in the Indian Ocean appears to be low-key, if one digs deeper, Japan can be found close to the center of maritime action in the Indian Ocean. A larger than generally thought of navy, it has been conducting maritime interdiction operations with other large navies, enhancing its reputation as a particularly proficient navy and indispensable partner. It too has acted upon the need for an own base away from home. A military base in Djibouti facilitates now logistics, maintenance, medical, and other services. The last one that I'm dealing with in terms of contestation in the Indian Ocean is France, and my colleague Dr. Bouchard has just alluded to most of these things. So I'll take a small breather while you read that. Right, some of the effects of the interaction of all these nations and others that I haven't mentioned is that all the above countries, plus some of those that I've not mentioned in this country, that are involved in this hegemonic contestation in the Indian Ocean, have forums of diplomatic interchange with the nations, regions, and continental Africa. All of these are designed to underpin cooperation, which may include maritime military cooperation. Some of the effects on Africa, for instance, is that it can and does lead to competition for resources, allocation of aid funding, and infrastructural development projects between the various African countries as they vie for limited and dwindling resources from donor nations. This may well, in turn, serve to undermine African cohesion and weaken unitary approaches. The second view, perspective that Africa East and Western Indian Ocean is that there is a consistent and persistent view that of Africa's passivity and inability to perform its maritime tasks. And of course, this contrasts very much with the dynamics that I've just noted in the Indian Ocean by the super and regional powers in the area. Just some history, really, some international maritime law background. At the final meeting of the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, which led to the adoption of the convention, its last president said that although and I quote, although the convention consists of a series of compromises, they form an integral whole. This is why the convention does not provide for reservations. It is therefore not possible for states to pick what they like and disregard and what they do not like. In international law, as in domestic law, rights and duties go hand in hand. It is therefore legally impermissible to claim rights under the convention without being willing to assume correlative duties. Yet, despite having ratified UNCLOS, Africa's undergovernance of the seas off and on of the Indian Ocean is a common thread. The obligation that lies with having been granted vast tracts of seaward estate by the international community, and in terms of quid pro quo, ensuring proper rule of law and oceans governance is not being carried out by the navies or the coast guards of Africa. The limitations are largely based upon poor economies and the lack of political will to change the situation. Even the South African Navy, having arguably the best maritime defense capability on the continent, is probably under-resourced, according to a recent article in Naval Forces entitled, "A Task Too Big for a Single Navy." The solution is said to lie in a regional maritime cooperation. This is not exactly a new conclusion, and it is in line with similar resolutions adopted at a number of platforms over a number of years. For instance, the Sea Power for Africa Symposia at the African Union, Southern African Development Community Standing Maritime Committee. So I would like to make two submissions: that regional cooperation should look beyond Africa. And secondly, major and strong regional power should be drawn into a greater extent than merely massaging their own national interest. Right, now we're now moving to the third view. Then this comprises non-African maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean. A manifestation in recent years has been an international fleet of maritime assets, which has been operational off the Horn of Africa, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden for some years to counter rising piracy. These maritime forces, including the odd submarine, MPAs, UAVs, up to 30 warships over the time from at least 4 different coalitions, have excellent maritime domain awareness over secure links. In a world where most of these disparate forces would most likely display some antagonism or hostility towards each other, it has added a new dimension to maritime diplomacy as these forces battle a common threat. At many levels, this may serve as a possible role model for the developing countries of the Indian Ocean Rim, pooling of resources and an area to consider. The last view that I'm having a look at it is the fourth and final view: Africa's involvement in international criminal law, which is the prosecution of largely Somali pirates. The United Nations Security Council has promulgated several resolutions intended for foreign states to police Somali waters and for pirates even continue this pursuit on land. The international response has been inconsistent. And I quote from some of the legal eagle: "This somewhat reluctant response from the international community is in large part the result of states proceeding cautiously in nebulous legal waters," unquote, and pirates' expansive human rights and nationality, which could include pirates' requests for asylum based on warlike conditions in Somalia, and hence the associated collapse of prosecution. Some states have aggressively prosecuted them in their home countries. Others follow a catch, disarm, and release policy. Other countries have requested East African littoral and island states in the area, Kenya, Tanzania, Seychelles, Mauritius, and Djibouti, to prosecute the pirates and imprison them if found guilty. The United Nations has formally proposed the setting up of specialized courts for the purposes of prosecuting pirates in these countries, although Somalia's transitional federal government has stated a preference to establish the court in Somalia itself. In response to requests by the United Nations, the European community, and individual countries, the burden of prosecuting pirates has fallen upon some African countries in exchange for funds from these organizations and countries, funds which would assist the country's prosecutorial resources. Yet, for instance, Kenya's fractious legal system already has a backlog of 900,000 cases. Its vastly overcrowded prison facilities designed for 16,000 criminals already holds 53,000. So in sum, with more than 1,000 men, and it doesn't look like there's much gender equality in piracy, currently in detention in 19 countries, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime is addressing an urgent situation, given that long-term imprisonment places a very substantial burden on prosecuting countries. Two views may arise from this. The African states may well regard these additional burdens as having been foisted upon them. More often than not, these pirates that are being or have been prosecuted were not even apprehended by their maritime forces or in their territorial waters or exclusive economic zones in return for offers of monetary assistance which they could not afford to refuse. The second view on this is that, and standing in some contrast to the first view, the capacity building is important and serves to have constructive effects beyond piracy prosecution. The rule of law is strengthened in these countries too, while Somalia gets an opportunity to walk towards a just and stable society for its citizens. Now, based upon these four perspectives that I've chosen and briefly analyzed, we need to ask ourselves, do the navies of Africa actually make a contribution to their country's national security and prosperity? So based upon my observations, I would say that at best they make a negligible contribution to the countries, and indeed their regional national security and prosperity. Put harshly, the position may even be put forward that under present conditions, the vast majority of navies of Africa are a drain on the fiscus. The navies do not represent taxpayer value for money, national resources in the sense that its triad of duties, that of combat, policing, constabulary, and diplomatic duties, should bring about. This situation could and should be turned around, and the answer could lie within the Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, or IOR-ARC. Its management principles include consensus decision-making and evolutionary and non-intrusive approaches based on open regionalism, minimalization of permanent institutions, with the main agency being regularized meetings of its foreign ministers. There are some that say that the IOR-ARC is relatively moribund and requires revitalization. Although disaster management lies within its structure, there is no defense and security component of this in the IOR. And to my mind, this is tantamount to an illogical lacuna and reflects vestiges of distrust from the Cold War. Seizing upon the security component that I've just noticed, the security component vacuum in the IOR-ARC, India, and specifically the Indian Navy, created the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, IONS, noted earlier, comprising maritime security elements of most IOR countries, which involves its members through active participation and ongoing programs. Again, and as with the belated reaction to maritime piracy, another maritime initiative has been successfully launched from beyond Africa, and Africa has been reactive again. Although it needs to be noted, and I say this in brackets, that the South African Navy is hosting the third IONS seminar, themed regional maritime security initiatives aimed at reducing modern maritime security threats over the period 10 to 13 April 2012 in Cape Town. IONS contains diverse nations that appear to be united in a common cause to safeguard the Indian Ocean so that seafarers can ply their legitimate business at sea. In the absence of formal statements, one can only draw your own critical success factors, and I'd like to propose that they could go beyond things like essay competition, technical seminars, regular member conference, i.e. typical talk shop status via mechanisms that could include confidence-building mechanisms, especially for those states that traditionally do not see eye to eye, and a steady decline in illegal maritime activities in the Indian Ocean. This would involve, for instance, legal instruments, regional cooperation, and the transfer of skills, joint acquisition, and the utilization of maritime asset projects. Right, we're getting to the final now, and you see the nice Australian logo there. So my presentation would suggest that the ion structure can be more effective. Its Achilles heel, and this is obviously my personal view, is the fact that it's a loose-standing institution. And it's just the navies of the Indian Ocean. They're not even backed by the defense forces, and in that term, it can be perceived as an Achilles heel. Further, and it's my contention and my proposal that IONS could and should be initiated and operationalized within the IOR-ARC, as the IONS is already functional and an active institution. To this effect, the challenge for the nations of the IONS is to cooperate and collaborate to ensure permanent maritime security in this major maritime arena, which could occur when scarce maritime resources are pooled and productively utilized. As Australia has accepted and has in fact begun its tenure as the chair for the IOR-ARC, and it is also an active participant in the IONS, and it is also the next chair after the South African Navy. Perhaps it should fall to the government of Australia to initiate and bring this about. This proposed arrangement appears to have more disadvantages than disadvantages. Moving IONS under the impressive integument of the IOR-ARC will give it greater legitimacy. It will close the defense and security structural lacuna that exists. It may lead to actual rather than virtual maritime military cooperation in the Indian Ocean. It may induce developing countries' navies to ensure proper UNCLOS governance of their sea areas, and could well amount to a diplomatic coup for Australia. Lastly, this may be a great catalyst in terms of international relations theory towards a merging of the countries of the periphery and those of the core in the Indian Ocean. So in sum, my presentation deals with the old Latin maxim, audio alteram partem. You must listen to the other side, but this is a continuous process where the one side listen to the other one and establish communication so that to that extent there can be greater understanding and greater cooperation. And I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Captain Van Rooyen, and that was, I think, an extensive, original and very effective presentation. It was both diplomatic and quite direct, I think, and it ended with a policy prescription. I wonder if people like Kevin Rudd were listening, because I think they're the kind of challenges that some people in our system relish, but a lot of hard work there. Look, we have some time for questions and discussion, and before we move into that, I just wanted to put one or two thoughts on the table that might guide us. I think both presentations have raised some very fundamental questions about how these transnational challenges in the region that are not going to go away and are actually getting worse, how can these be addressed in cooperative ways that also minimise frictions between powers in and external powers to the region. The line, I think, a task too big for a single navy obviously doesn't apply only to the South African Navy when you're looking at the Indian Ocean. So I guess, for my money, that's the sort of a guiding thought for our discussion. But I know that there'll be many questions from the room, so I please invite you to raise your hands, identify yourselves when you speak, and try and confine it to a question if you can. We'll take the first question from the floor. If I can see some movement down there. Right. Look, while people are gathering, here we are. We have a question down here at the front, I think, from our friend from the Indian Navy.
Vice Admiral Robin Darwin, the Vice Chief of Naval Staff of Indian Navy. And my question is for Captain Frank Rooyen. The prophecy of Mahan, certainly for the Indian Ocean and the importance of the Indian Ocean in the 21st century, has certainly come true. But I'm sure even Mahan may not have envisaged that we would have been grappling with pirates in the 21st century, or indeed that there would be maritime terrorism of this scale in the Indian Ocean. In this current environment, how do you see that the maritime nations, which have an important stake in the Indian Ocean, adopting an approach of either the hegemonistic contestations, rivalry, or indeed power struggle, or is it going to be indeed the path of building bridges of friendship and cooperation that you outlined?
Thank you very much for that question, and I'd be quite happy if both speakers want to have a go at it.
Sir, that's obviously the $30 million question. I think if nations can work together and start identifying common threats and overcome their prejudices, their potential and actual hostilities through confidence-building measures, this needs to be balanced out with each country's specific national security needs in this area. And the flow of energy and maritime trade in this area is particularly important. So it's actually a very difficult one to predict. It needs to be balanced out. But the bit of research that I've done so far indicates that although there appears to be hegemonic and increasing contestation in the Indian Ocean, the idea of conflict does not seem to arise. Countries have had long and hard experience that it's in fact better to build upon diplomatic resources rather than go for confrontation, because confrontation will tend to be a one-off scenario, whereas diplomacy can ensure well-being for all states.
Thank you. We have another question at the front. Please wait for the mic.
Sorry. I'm Riyad Admiral Romero from Argentina. My question is for Frank. I would like to ask you if you see any particular action from the international community to tackle the real roots of piracy on the east side of Africa, in the countries in Somalia, because I think we are a little bit caught on an action of from the navies and punishing, the action, but we are not getting, the real roots of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, sir. Is the microphone on? Yeah. So we all know that the root of the problem lies ashore, and the fact that Somalia is not a weak but a failed state, and has no governance whatsoever, and its obligations towards the international community effectively ended in 1991 when its government collapsed, and it became a failed and increasingly failing state. I proposed in a paper that I wrote for the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis based in New Delhi. I actually propose a model based on the United Nations Conference of the Law of the Sea, where when nations need to get together and work out a problem, not a solution, not only for Somalia, but for all weak, failed and failing states, so that the international order can bring some solution towards states like Somalia. And it's a particularly protracted process, as the Conference on the Law of the Sea was. I think it started in 1973 and ended in 1982. And it will need lots of resources and much patience over many years. But the world needs to find a solution towards failed and failing states. So that's about all, sir.
Thanks. I think it's Lee Cordner over here. I've got a bit of sea blindness with this, this light.
Yes, thanks very much, Rory. Lee Cordner, independent strategic analyst and part-time naval officer. A question for both speakers, which came out of the presentations. I think you both touched on it. Particularly, Frank talked about the lack of regional architecture and the need for that. But I think a big question sits over the question of leadership. Frank suggested that Australia could provide a greater leadership role. But, you know, realistically, where do each of you see the leadership coming from? My own experience with IONS is a great initiative, but there has been a reluctance on the part of India and others to go beyond tactical and technical type cooperation, which is a good thing in itself, but to go anything further than that, there seems to be a reluctance to, and no appetite to take that on. So who's going to provide the leadership? Where do you see it coming from? And what sort of leadership? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lee. Would you like to begin, Dr. Bouchard?
I guess I can comment. Obviously, there's a difficult balance between, for example, in the Southwest Indian Ocean and the France position. There's a difficult balance because France has definitively taken the leadership on many issues. And at sea, it's certainly the power, for many reasons, that has the most asset and that has been the most willing, I guess, to collaborate with all the other African countries around. At the same time, there's also a lot of suspicion that comes with this leadership or this very voluntary, I think, position from France. Nevertheless, I guess it has worked really well until in the last 2 decades in this area especially, that France had been willing to take a leadership because obviously the sea securities and threats around had to be dealt with. Now, where can we bring this on a higher level? I suppose, obviously, some African states would have to be engaged at the same, not on the operation level, but at the same diplomatic level at least. And I don't have much more answer to that. I'm not familiar really with how IONS really work, but this is really a pattern that we can see in almost all issues in this area.
That is a very interesting question. So I've got two issues. The first one, I think my colleagues who use PC correct phrases would say that both IONS and IOR-ARC are functioning, and I quote, suboptimally. That's a nice phrase to use. So there's actually nothing. I think Australia should ask itself, what can we lose by taking this initiative? Australia can only enhance its reputation, and as I suggested, it could be a diplomatic coup for Australia, seeing that it's in the power seat, so to speak, for both these institutions. And the combination of both these institutions can actually make it a stronger one rather than 2 weak ones. And let's face it, if you look at the IOR-ARC, they have their ministers of foreign affairs meeting once a year. How dramatic can that be? They're massaging this thing. It could be and could be stronger. But on the other hand, one of your commodores yesterday, and I forget his name, the one with the Italian surname, he actually asked a very pertinent question yesterday. The issue lies with how many nations does it take to cooperate at regional level optimally? At which point does it become totally useless? When you can say, sorry, we just can't work together. Is it 3, 5, 17? At which point does it begin to break down? And I suspect more research will have to be done about that.
Can I take that point further there? Because I think that's one of the fundamental questions we all face. How many partners is the right number? And I think certainly one of the challenges from some of our experience with IORAC, with the wider diplomatic structure, is that it literally is too disparate. There are too many players with too many different interests and such vastly varying levels of capability and capacity. How do you make that work? So I'd be interested, I don't know if either of the speakers want to comment a little further on the pros and cons of something that's more minilateral or functional, a self-selecting arrangement of perhaps 3, 4, 5 powers, perhaps a mix of regional powers and external stakeholders. Are there any models or any experiences that are worth considering there? Because I think the IRARC and IONS combination integration I think it's a wonderful idea, but I think the diplomatic challenges in making that work are going to be pretty daunting. So I'd be just interested in any further thoughts from either speaker on that.
But then Australia has always risen to challenges.
Sorry?
Australia has always risen to challenges.
Yes. Oh, no, I think we've had some interesting struggles in the East Asian context in this regard in recent years, and I know it's one of the questions on the minds of Australian sort of ministers and leaders in that regard. We'll take from the floor. We've got time for sort of 2 or 3 more questions. So if I can see any hands raised, I'll take them on board.
James Brown from the Lowy Institute. Just wanted to draw both of you out on the question of private responses to anti-piracy. There's somewhat of a gold rush on for private armed guards and private escort vessels operating in the Indian Ocean. I just wanted to get a sense of whether, in your view, that's a practical solution, and also what you think the likely regional response will be from coastal states as more and more of these contractors pop up.
Okay, I can begin. Yeah, so quite frankly, this is really far from my own research area and competence, so I would prefer not to really say anything at this point, because obviously this is a really good question you're asking, but maybe.
And there's been a lot of debate lately about private security firms and quasi-military operating off civilian or off merchant ships. Obviously, there are lots of pros and cons, and I think if it can prevent piracy from happening, obviously that's a good thing, and it should be encouraged. But on the other hand, one should note that this is merely still addressing the symptom of, not the cause of piracy, and so that one should always take heed of that.
We have more questions from the floor. One issue that hasn't had a lot of play in the last hour or two really is it certainly came up in both presentations, but I'd be interested in hearing if there's any more on it. Really, is what's the likely role of China going to be in addressing these challenges in the Indian Ocean? And I'm wondering if either of the speakers would care to comment further on assessing the likely future role of China, and also what are some desirable outcomes in terms of bringing China into cooperative arrangements in the region, perhaps from the French perspective or perhaps more generally?
I guess generally speaking, China definitively is a newcomer in the Indian Ocean, and it's not going to go away. We cannot look at China differently than the other foreign powers. They are all in the Indian Ocean at this time because they have their own national interests. China obviously becoming one of the 2 main powers in this globe has no other option than to get involved in the Indian Ocean. It pursues different, I would say, aims by doing this. So we have not to be surprised that they are there. At the same time, it's not the same context that we had in the Cold War. We can involve China in discussion, in cooperation. It's going far beyond what is happening right now, but we can engage China on issues. I don't have much more to add. It is obvious for me, and that this is a point that a lot of people forget about. So they are there, they are changing the landscape very much. They're changing the landscape at a moment where the United States power is also evolving in this area, at a moment where Indian power at sea is definitively evolving also, or rising if you would like. And those new conditions have to be really analyzed, assessed. But we are in this, I suppose it's a much more positive situation than it would have been 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where now the discussion and is possible. I don't know how far it can go right now. It will be a long process. China is going to definitively get more and more involved in the area. It's not only a naval issue, it's an economic issue. There are ashore in every country now. They are rapidly advancing their own aims in some areas, for example, in the Southwest Indian Ocean. So every other traditional player of this area has to take this for granted, that China is there. And I don't see that necessarily as a negative point. We have to really be honest, and the other are there for the same reason.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that?
I would agree with my colleague. China will continue to escalate its presence in the Indian Ocean, commensurate with its rapidly growing economy and its increasing status as a maritime power. And so China is not going to go away, it's going to get bigger. But at the same time, the research that I've done indicates that to some extent, China resents both India and the United States of America, or specifically India, regarding the Indian Ocean as its ocean. And America, its views that America has solitary rights of hegemony in the Indian Ocean. So it's saying to itself, there's nothing that that prevents us from saying or performing the same role as the United States in the Indian Ocean, and really there isn't.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question from the floor, and then I think we'll need to wrap up. And in the absence of... Can I see a question? No.
Yes.
We have one here. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm Lieutenant Allicott from the Australian Navy, and my question is directed at Captain Van Rooyen. So moments ago, you mentioned that despite hegemonistic tendencies in the IOR, that the desire or risk of conflict is quite low. And please excuse my paraphrasing. My question is, do you see this as enduring into the future, especially given China's increasing presence? And could you please comment on how you've come to this conclusion?
Sorry, did you say the very last part of your question?
If you could please comment on how you came to that conclusion.
Yeah, well, all I can say is really that the research indicates that contestation doesn't necessarily lead to conflict. There will be much toing and froing, but in the end, I think they'll resolve the issues diplomatically. So, because contestation or that contestation that will lead to conflict will have a no-winner situation. And I'm sorry, I still haven't heard the last part of your question. I've got an ear infection, that's why.
Sorry, it's just to see if you see this enduring into the future.
Enduring future? Enduring into the future. Of what? Sorry, ma'am, I'm going to have to speak to you in private.
I think, I guess from my own point of view, I think to some extent the previous answers really touched on this question, and it is a fundamental question, China's roles and objectives in the Indian Ocean. I think in opening this session today, I began by pointing out that in the last few years, the conversation has focused on the growing roles and interests of major powers, and obviously China, along with, of course, India, the regional great power, and the United States are the three names that keep popping up. But it's very clear from the two very comprehensive presentations today that we have to think about a lot more than those three big fish. And there are regional players, regional powers, and in the case of France, a very interesting country that's both an external stakeholder and a regional power that have much to offer in finding cooperative solutions to the problems in the Indian Ocean. So I want to ask you now to show your thanks and appreciation to our speakers, and we now move to lunch. Thank you.
Skipped church one Sunday, rode out and throwed in my line.